I wanted to set my own rules and do my own thing. And this is something that I valued much more than absolute growth. The thing that has always affected me has been the imposter syndrome. I thought, well, I must be doing something wrong and whatever Maven has been doing must have been right. This either has to start generating some money or I have to stop it. But how? How can you make a business with a jar file? 3 or 4 days in, somebody bought a pro license. This was such an important confidence booster. This going from 0 to 1. It really felt as if this had been a rocket with propellant and you just needed to light the fuse.
Hey folks, welcome to a new episode of The Marco Show. Today with a new exciting guest, we're going to be talking about how to build and sell a successful open source project. Who are you?
So my name is Axel Fontaine and I'm very happy to be here because it's actually the first time I'm going to be talking about all those details of how the Flyway, which some of you may know, has actually evolved from a tiny idea one evening riding my bike in Munich to commercial success and then later selling the company. So lots of information that you've never heard before and I'm very happy to share it with you today.
For people who don't know what Flyway is, how would you describe Flyway? What is Flyway?
Flyway was really an itch that I was scratching for myself. It was a way to regain control on the evolution of a database schema. It was something that I was facing frequently at the time, where basically you would have an application and the application would depend on certain objects like tables or functions or other objects being present in the database, and somehow they wouldn't be there, or some statement would not have been applied when a new version of the code would have been rolled out. And I thought we have to come up with some kind of deterministic way to take care of this. And Flyway has basically packaged those kind of properties into a project that then evolved or has been evolving for the last 15 years to
So essentially a database migration script tool to keep track of the migrations, apply them to a database and those sort of things, yeah?
Correct. The concept wasn't really new. It had been around, I think, I believe it's Rails that must have started that at the time. So I was aware that there were some solutions out there. And yes, I felt that what we had on the JVM side wasn't really what I had in mind, and so it turned out indeed to be that, to have some kind of tool to deterministically apply a sequence of changes to the database.
When you said the JVM environment didn't have such a tool, and you mentioned you've been in software for 25 years, what was your direct work experience before that essentially led to the creation of Flyway?
So I think we have to step back a little bit in time. The creation of Flyway happened around 2010. I started my career around the end of the 90s. So you have to think that this is a time where even version control wasn't something universal yet. At the time I started, and then gradually we had terrible solutions like Visual Source Safe and a few others where, let's say, persistence wasn't always a thing, and that gradually became better. We then had Subversion, we had Git, and so we evolved as an industry with our practices, and that really improved. And we had concepts like unit testing that, again, weren't very widespread at the beginning, that were beginning to establish themselves, and JUnit entered onto the scene, and that was very interesting. And then we had things like continuous integration that, again, didn't really exist at the time. Somebody would run potentially not even a build, but from their IDE or their tooling would kind of create some kind of executable, and we would deliver that, and then gradually that became scripted.
By the way, that's how I started. I mean, we just built it on our laptops, delivered that, and that was essentially it for the customer. You just had one person who said, hey, let's build it, and yeah, off you went. Okay.
Yeah, and delivering turned out to be potentially burning a CD and driving over to your customers and handing that CD physically over to them. So yeah, so we've come a long way since then. And then we had the early evolution of cruise control, I believe, from some people at ThoughtWorks, which was the first real iteration of a CI system. And that then later became Hudson, which turned into Jenkins, and then where we are today with GitHub Actions and a few other things. And as we kind of climbed the ladder of automation with the industry and became better and better, I was working as a consultant at the time and was working for various customers over the years. And so we could kind of feel always that, yes, the automation was really gaining momentum and it was clearly the way forward. And we were getting better at building the software, but there were two other components in there that really hadn't matured yet. One of them was the ability to do automated deployments, so that of the code itself. So that's something that after we'd been building it with CI and we no longer wanted to hand out CDs, this kind of became a thing. It was still rather difficult at the time, especially in the JVM world, when we were still talking about the web spheres and the web logics of this world, where it wasn't as self-contained as what we had today. And it was, in a sense, a regression also compared to where we were coming from before, where the desktop software of the 90s with Delphi and the solutions that were state of the art at the time really allowed you to have a self-contained solution that you could then deploy. And we lost that for a while. And luckily, since Spring Boot came back on the JVM side, we're kind of coming back to something like that. So we had a lot of work to do on that front. And parallel to the code, we also had to deal with configuration changes that had to be rolled out, which was a big mess for a while as well, and the database. And so along these different customer projects, over the years, I clearly saw an evolution of here, we're kind of improving on that, or we're pushing a little bit on this, and that's gaining acceptance. Because you have to think that there was a lot of resistance as well about automating these things.
Absolutely, especially from DBAs. I've seen in many projects where they said, we're not going to automate any of this. You have to give us a script somehow, and we're going to manually apply them and roll them back and that sort of things.
Yes, DBAs or system administrators that insisted on manually copying the files over on the production server. So it took a while for that resistance to diminish, but then eventually we were there. And then I went to this phase in, let's say, the mid 2000s, something like that, where there was this itch in my consultancy career that was beginning, where I thought, I actually want to build some things on my own as well, experiment a little bit. Like, there were the first couple of voices online starting as well, with open source was slowly becoming a thing, but also some software as a service was slowly becoming a thing. And so I had this thing in mind that next to my consultancy career, I really wanted to build at some point some kind of business of my own. That
when you say business, were you sure at the beginning already, okay, I'm going to start with an open source project, which hopefully someday might turn into business? Did it matter already, or what were you fixated on? It needs to be a business which at some point needs to be self-sustainable, maybe even? I mean, did you have that already back in mind, or was it just, let's do the first couple of steps and see whatever is going to happen?
Oh no, I had no clue at all. I had no clue at all when I was starting. Coming purely from a technical background and not really been thinking about that, but the tool I was working on happened to be facing that same problem, where I had to evolve the database schema somehow. When I was looking at that, I began to look into solutions, into what the market had to offer. And didn't really find something that truly appealed to me. So I had some ideas in mind of what a solution should look like, and was looking around and ended up then building something very simplistic for myself. And the customer I was working for at the time, I saw had a similar need, and we had already made good progress on those other fronts with CI and automating deployment, and then it was a good fit to propose this idea to them as well, but without handing them over the IP. I felt like...
Right. So you actually made them dog food, the very first, let's say, proof of concept of whatever then Flyway turned into?
Pretty much. So I had it for myself first. So I was customer number one, if you want, or user number one. I had something with MySQL, I think, at the time in my hobby project. And the customer was on Oracle, and I I didn't want to repeat a mistake that I had made a few years prior, where for some other customer I'd created a bit of tooling, was quite nice to, and you have to think it's the mid-2000s, we had WSDL and web services, and I'd created a little thing that replaced their entire Word documentation of the web service with some annotations in the WSDL, and then you could generate HTML documentation with a click, and you had something very nice. But I didn't think about the IP at the time, and then it was all in the hands of the customer. I didn't want to repeat this mistake a second time. I thought this is something I'm developing in my spare time, and the customer can use it if they want, but the IP stays with me. And that's how that kind of got started there, and decided to do it as an open source project instead.
Just to step back once, because you said you already had a look at the market, what the market might or might not have had to offer back then. I saw that, at least I read it online, that Liquibase, which you could probably say was a direct competitor, or let's say a similar project.
Absolutely.
Was already around when you started, because online it said it was started 2006, which would make it a couple of years before that. Did you have a look at Liquibase even when you started, and did you think, hey, there is already a player, but they do it so differently, I have a completely different idea of how to tackle it back then?
Oh, absolutely did. I had a look at Liquibase, I had a look at what the Rails world was doing. There were about 7 or 8 other open source projects tackling that problem in the JVM space as well. So I looked at all of them, because let's say the first idea, if we step back a bit, was really not to get involved into all this, was just to, like you would do with any other open source or project that you pick, or any problem that you face, and you look for a suitable open source project, is to use something off the shelf and not pull all this work onto my lap and start having to deal with it. So I was really looking for something simple where I could use just plain SQL scripts, and something that was relatively close to the database. And Liquibase, with the at the time they only had their XML change sets. I thought it wasn't really the thing that I wanted, because I wanted the full power of the database to be available. I didn't really want the abstraction in between. There was another piece of software, if I remember correctly, something like C5 migrations, I think, Carbon 5 migrations. They were very close to the model that I had in mind. And so I had a detailed look at that and tried to use it. And at the end, it didn't really fit perfectly. And then I thought, okay, I can either start submitting pull requests to and hope that they get accepted, to kind of bend it into the shape that I would be interested in. But the more I looked at it, the more I saw that the amount of work that I would have to submit to actually get it into the shape I wanted it to be in would be almost equivalent to just kind of doing it myself, and then not having to argue whether some changes made sense or not. And so I decided to roll my own instead of that.
You know, this is, I find, a fascinating point, because usually when programmers would come to me, and then they would almost always kind of defer to, well, there's an existing solution, but I better build my own solution because it does, 1, 2, 3 things better. And I would almost always recommend them to go with the already existing solution, kind of, because you overestimate the work that needs to be then, in putting it off. I find it fascinating that you had a look at these competitors, and then you did the work in terms of let's build something, and then it actually seemingly didn't just resonate with you, but it resonated at the end of the day with a ton of people out there, kind of, which you probably couldn't have known before then, kind of. I mean, to know that the market actually digs the simplicity of Flyway as much as it then kind of did.
Part of it is already, as I said, a bit naivety as well. Didn't really know what I was doing either, so I kind of stepped into that without really knowing everything it entailed. I didn't really plan on doing it, but ended up doing it anyway when the other solutions didn't match. I think very often buying is definitely the right solution, or as I mentioned here, using some existing solution in terms of open source would have been the ideal choice. And had it existed, then I certainly would have used that. I think the thing that we shouldn't forget either is that it's a very big world out there, and a very big market or a very big industry. And so there is room for multiple solutions to the same problem. and people will have certain preferences one way or the other. And I guess the way that I enjoy there with making use of the full power of the database and having this very direct mapping with one-to-one with the SQL that you write and what then gets executed is something that ended up being something that other people enjoyed as well or found use into.
Were you ever motivated through competition? Kind of thinking that, hey, so we've got the tiny Flyway seed planted. We've got Liquibase, we've got the others. I just want to be bigger than them as from a purely competitive side. Did you ever have these kind of thoughts?
There's always a little bit of vanity involved, for sure, for sure. But yes and no. I didn't look at competition all that much after I got started. It kind of took a life of its own where it was useful to me. It was useful to a number of early users, and they came with feedback and other ideas and hit certain limits, and they had to be overcome. And so it kind of grew organically from there, but not primarily driven by the competition. Having a look at the competition that came later on, I guess, more when much later when it really turned into a business, and there was a bit of more fun in that direction. Okay. But in the beginning, I didn't particularly care, I must say.
And did you also not care about, did you at some point maybe just once in a while look at their features and think, hey, maybe this is a good feature, I should maybe kind of copy it or adapt it in some certain way? That sort of product maybe thinking, did you ever have that when looking at these others?
Most of the solutions that were out there were relatively simple, so the feature set was rather restricted as well. And even Liquibase, like it is today, is much more advanced than the Liquibase that was available at the time when I was starting. So in terms of direct competition and features, I don't know, maybe I peeked over from time to time, but it was not something that was really driving the roadmap. I would say the feedback from the users and the issues that were being raised, I think that was much stronger driver that was dwarfing any kind of looks at the competition.
You already mentioned you wanted it to be as simple and as close as possible to, let's say, the database. Was that in basically the earliest and most important, let's say, technical architectural decision? Did you have some sort of, guidelines? This is how this needs to be, apart from the closeness to the database?
This was what it had to be from a user's perspective, in terms of the mental model that you had to adopt to use the tool. In terms of the implementation behind the scenes, it's a different story. But from the user model, that's what I was striving for. That was the North Star that I kept in mind and tried to follow all along, and hope not haven't diverted too much from that either. I think the other North Star that I had in terms of from the user experience, and that was very much from a developer standpoint, was zero dependencies. I really thought that this was always some very important aspect for a library, to reduce your amount of dependencies to the bare minimum. I think we've been bitten too many times in the industry with things like DLL hell before, or later in our JVM world with incompatible versions of different jars. I think today it's easy, for example, for various just recently, for example, I tried to integrate the SDKs of various cloud providers into the same application, and it's a mess because they depend on a ton of things, and then they'll have a Jackson dependency in a certain version here, and the other one depends on the other, and then you have transitive dependencies making things even worse. And so it was already a problem at the time, and I really didn't want to impose this burden on my users. I thought it's better that I encapsulate as much of that complexity myself to take away the worry that it was going to break the environment of the users. So this was also some design principle I held on very, very strongly over the years.
It's very interesting. Do you think it kind of helped? Because I've seen many people try build startups, and as a developer, I think the user end focus is always super tricky because you like building, and then you kind of, the user end focus gets blurry. Probably was this kind of special because you were in fact the end user, so to speak. I mean, you built it for other developers. You then were the end user, and that's why you had this focus from the beginning in mind. Because I see many developers struggling with that. Actually, it's just building, and not having this superb simplicity and end usage, at the top of their heads, kind of.
I had to go through that learning curve myself as well. The big moment that I had for that. So you have to think the project, if we step back in time a little bit, started on something that was called Google Code. It was the GitHub before GitHub, running with Mercurial instead of Git, but it was a very early similar collaboration platform. And so the thing I had there was basically just a page with a couple of jar files that I had uploaded for download, and was rather simple. And eventually it kind of grew a little bit. I had a few additional pages, but it wasn't really easy to version the documentation. And eventually I ended up creating some kind of GitHub pages-based website for that. And that was also the time when I thought, okay, the onboarding experience really should be something I should document. I should have some kind of getting started tutorial. And I was writing these tutorials, and I all of a sudden thought, geez, this is way too hard. Like, there's no need to know about this early, or to, how come the user needs to do all these extra steps here? This could be simplified. This is much harder than I need to be. And this was such an important moment for me to kind of step back and really step into the shoes of the beginner, of the user being confronted with a product for the first time. And that was a huge eye-opener in how then everything from there had to be documented and designed.
That is a great point, learning through writing onboarding material for your own project. The funny thing is, I mean, I've been working here as a developer advocate for quite a while. And it is interesting. We go through the same experience when we try to explore new features or stuff to people, and then you use it for the first time, you write it down and you see, hey, how complex it is. And it should just be one step instead of 10 steps. And that really now informs our product development a lot in keeping things simple. And it's interesting to see you go through the same loop.
Yeah, it's something that Jeff Bezos very much pushed at Amazon as well, to start with pretty much with the release announcement of the product. Before actually building it, and then working back from there to the actual solution. And it really helped. It was a sobering moment when I wrote it down as it currently was, the getting started steps, and then realized, oh no, this must be so much better to really make it accessible to a wider audience.
A shameless plug for everyone who's interested in IntelliJ IDEA. We've just went through the first full cycle of what Axel just described, starting with the release announcement written down from a product development perspective for the last IntelliJ IDEA release. And you can find the stream for 2025.2 online, where we really try to put that end user focus heavily to bring you the best, most exciting features, instead of just, giving you smaller features here and there. And it is a real change in process. How did you, when you then, let's say we started with a very simple proof of concept, and then, suddenly you started adding more and more features, kind of. How did you keep that end user focus in terms of, how did you construct your roadmap? How did you know what to build then next, actually, in the next iterations? How did that work?
My own understanding of the problem grew over the years as the more time I'd invested with it and the more discussions I had about it, both online and in real life, and then talking to people where it wasn't a good fit yet, or the resistance or the pushback. So that was very interesting. And then, of course, the specific issues that were being faced in the project. I always focused on fixing bugs before new features. I thought it was very, very important that what is there as a feature set works extremely well, so that you can rely on it and you don't have a half-broken thing. And so in terms of priorities, I always prioritize that first, because I wanted to have that just for me also in terms of pride, I like to have something that works well and be happy with the work when I sign it. So that was I think always the highest on the priority list. And then in terms of features, it was very much. Yeah, it was driven by two things. So on the one hand, the learning for me about the product. So that happened also. Flyway leading up to 1.0 and a little bit between 1 and 2.0. I had these early users and giving me early bits of feedback. I was surprised actually that anybody was using it at all in the beginning. I think the first year in total there were something like 1,000 downloads over the year. So for me, that was tremendous, and I was very, very happy about that. And I had these early users that in the small subset that was available at the time still found a lot of value. But one of the early friction points that came in there and is in direct contradiction with the North Stars I was talking about before is that in the early versions of Flyway, I still had a dependency on Spring. For convenience, they had things like the JDBC template and a few other things, so they're very nice. And this became a growing problem as the user base expanded, and basically people from the wider ecosystem didn't necessarily have Spring in their applications. And I realized, no, I really have to be really strict about this. There can be zero dependencies except for that for the JDBC driver. So this is something that triggered then some early work in that direction to kind of bring all those external utilities back in-house in the project in some simplified form, just a subset that I needed. And then from there, it was primarily, once that had been achieved, very reactionary also on what the users needed. You could see that with upvotes or number of comments in issues, but always in the aggregate, never really thinking about one specific issue, but how would this fit into the overall picture without steering too far, of course. Does it make sense to integrate it here or there? And that would kind of then determine the priority of when I would do things.
To go quickly back to the bug fixing part, do I have to imagine it as almost like what's it called, a zero email inbox or whatever, that you really try to squash every bug there was before working on something new? Or was there some leeway kind of where you said, okay, now it's enough bug squashing, or what did that look like?
It's always trade-offs and pragmatism, of course. Some things that seem like small issues may mean a giant rework to be able to accommodate them. So then you can document those as limitations of the product, where in certain directions, well, just be careful. You might still cut yourself when you do that there and just classify it as that for the moment. But it was in all, let's say, the scope and the functionality and the supported targets in terms of database that were announced, and really trying to do it, but then within reason, of course. But if it couldn't be done, document it as a limitation and potentially tackle it later or leave it like that.
Flyway and database migration tool scripts are in general more for people who build software, who actually build real world production software. And from that perspective, did you put extra stress on maybe testing? And you said, you wanted to be sure that the quality is nice and right, but how did you make sure that the quality was actually, there weren't any problems, maybe because of database, I don't know if database deviations or different database platforms played a big role in that, but how did you keep track of that, the whole stability quality kind of?
Testing wasn't a very easy part because as soon as you have some kind of external system you integrate with, it becomes more complex. And the very nature of Flyway was integrating with tons of different database systems in different versions over the years. So there's not an easy part to tackle. I guess in the beginning, they were primarily unit tests, and I would have databases installed directly on my machine.
Because there was no Docker or whatever, if I remember.
This was pre-Docker. You already had VMs to a certain extent, but yeah, they were still very clunky at the time and rather difficult. And so I just had all these databases installed on my machine. I would have an Oracle Express and a MySQL. I know whenever there would be like developer editions available at no cost, I would have then those installed. But of course, it kind of pollutes, quote, your development environment as well by having all that running there as well. So that was a little bit difficult and became a struggle, or more and more of a struggle as the scope of Flyway expanded and more databases were added, and some were rather complicated to then test, or maybe later some were just in the cloud as well. So that was something that has needed constant effort over the years. At the end, I arrived at some kind of model where I pretty much had everything Dockerized, and I was testing against every single version of every database I was running at, because you would then have subtle differences between them, where some statements would only be supported here and not in a prior version, or you would have sometimes things being taken away or that wouldn't quite work the same anymore. And again, by saying I wanted to guarantee the quality, this is then something that really took more and more effort to be able to achieve that goal over the years. Some databases were always a pain in the ass as well. Things like Sybase and some ancient things that were just utterly disastrous to have in a development environment. It's don't try this at home. Don't test Sybase. Not fun.
I can imagine. Going back to how technical founders usually, when they build a SaaS platform or whatever, they spend time, let's say, building. They should be spending more time on marketing maybe, or going out there and convincing more people kind of that, hey, this is the tool they should, or the software they should be using. Did you ever have that in mind where you said, hey, let's not just build things, but I don't know, go to conferences all the time, talk about Flyway, publish blog posts, go into magazines back then, God knows what. Did you have that in mind where you also said, hey, I'm going to split up my workday in not just the technical stuff, but I really need to fix this other stuff as well, because I want to make Flyway bigger in that regard?
Well, it's good you mentioned that. It wasn't, as I said, in the beginning, I really had no clue. So I kind of stumbled into a lot of this. And part of the thing that has always affected me, and much more in the beginning of my career than later, but still has been the imposter syndrome. And I'd always thought, can I really do this or not? And then eventually, as I was going to conferences in the 2000s, and I was very interested in watching the people there on stage speak, and I thought, well, at some point, this guy doesn't really know that much more than I do. And I think maybe sometimes I should be up there. And so that kind of started in parallel to this whole story with Flyway, where I thought, well, the experiences that I'd been gathering with, I was quite early with the whole continuous deployment, continuous delivery thing, just even before the continuous delivery book was published, but that then kind of gave the whole thing a name. So that was then a phase where I thought, well, actually I should kind of start talking about those things and see if there is any kind of interest. So parallel to creating Flyway, I also begun speaking at local user groups and then conferences about continuous delivery, and that of course fitted the Flyway story quite nicely as well. And so I could use that as an early promotion vehicle to talk about it. And the other aspect I pursued in the beginning was the long tail. I searched online where I could find blog posts that were talking about a similar problem, and maybe from a few years prior, and I would leave comments. By the way, this has now been solved, or I have a solution out there that if someone's interested, can have a look at and could potentially help you. And I think these were like the early seeds of the marketing and how it started without really consciously thinking about it as marketing at the time. And that then kind of slowly got the ball rolling, I guess. Those were like the early days like that.
I think when I think about your name and then the piece of content which I for whatever reason associate with your name. Do you have an idea what do you think I would associate with your name, kind of? I mean, apart from Flyway?
Yes, absolutely. I think you're thinking about the Maven Release Plugin blog post.
This is it. Yes. This is it.
Yes.
I kid you not.
Yes.
Can you ask me 10 years later and I wouldn't have to think about it. I would just say the Maven Release blog post is what I associate with you. Yeah,
that fits very well into this whole imposter syndrome thing, where for a long time I thought, well, I must be doing something wrong, and whatever Maven has been doing must have been right because everybody's using it like that. And I really started to have these doubts. Just had these doubts with some people on stage where I thought I should be there. I thought, well, no, I actually think this is not how it should work. There's got to be a better way. And then looked into that and found something for me that really seemed like a better way because the Maven Release Plugin at the time, I haven't looked at it in a while, but it had this horrible thing whenever you wanted to create a release, you would need multiple commits in your source repository because you would then store the version number also in the revision. And then basically the whole process was much more complex than it needed to be. And with that early work on continuous delivery, I wanted to have something where each commit could then be automatically tagged, versioned, and deployed onto whatever target system you would have. And the Maven Release Plugin was creating so much friction there in that process that it just didn't seem right. And and then I tried my hand at documenting that and blogging, and that did have a nice echo at the time. Yes.
In terms of just to go back once more to technical or architectural decisions, we talked about, let's say, the good stuff, the good principles. We already talked a bit about the dependency to Spring, which was kind of an issue. But looking back, was there any major, error, mistake you did just from a technical perspective, where you said, hey, if I had to do Flyway again, these are the learnings from just a pure technical perspective, what you should have done differently, kind of?
It's hard to say because some things would not be fitting now, but may have been the right decision at the time. For example, the early versions of Flyway, it was very simple. It was just, there was no real parser in there for the SQL. It was really very, very simplistic. Just some kind of loop that would load like one file after the other in the right order, and then some kind of state that would be kept as what has been executed. And in terms of executing the SQL files themselves, it was very, very naive. It was just something like literally almost splitting the file into strings delimited by semicolons and then using that as statements. And that, of course, breaks down once you have more complex stored procedures or function. And so at the time, it worked and it was sufficient for the needs. But of course, this had to be completely reworked over the years to have something that would work for a wider range of use cases. So there has been a lot, like everything's been gutted out and replaced over the years of what was initially there. In terms of major strategic mistakes, I think the dependency one was probably one of the biggest ones in the beginning. And then after that, the biggest mistakes were mainly made sometime in the middle phase. I was starting to have some doubts about the project where it was generating a lot of work and I was becoming a little bit lazy I wasn't becoming as hard in rejecting contributions and let some things in that I later regretted and took a long time to get out again. That was the biggest issue that crept up after that, but the rest kind of just evolved over time and just matured as needed.
Mm-hmm. It already brings us to somewhat of the next topic, the whole thing of community and maybe stewarding the project. Did you see yourself as, let's say, the benevolent dictator of the project, kind of? Or did you have a much more mentally open model where you said, yeah, well, sure. I mean, let's accept these contributions from whoever they come because you might feel a bit of a burnout at that stage. What was your mindset? Was that essentially your baby and 100% your calls, or how did that work?
No, definitely on the side of dictatorship, for sure, for sure. No, because I had certain ideas in mind of how it should be, and that's why I started it. And then those ideas only solidified over time as I gained experiences. So I had a clear direction of where I wanted this to go, and I didn't want to diverge into other things. So that there's a certain focus that I wanted to keep there. And so contributions is something that I always saw as a mixed blessing, because it's very helpful, but also imposes a certain pressure and guilt where you feel that somebody has put in a lot of work into certain things, and then you feel kind of guilty to say no or ask them to rework everything. So that's always a little bit difficult. And then there is also the thing that this complete vision of where you want with the product is something that is rarely shared by people contributing. They will have their local vision of what their project, their company needs, but will not have had the discussion with all these other companies and all these other needs, and will then try to steer the project in a certain direction that may, in their eyes, look right, but isn't necessarily right for the broader scale of things. And so that was always a little bit, push and pull, and rather, a tightrope to kind of navigate, to kind of make sure that was all right and there was a right balance to be found there.
First, to get contributions, you need these contributors. But how did you get your first, let's say, 10 users and then your first 10 contributors? How did the first 10, 100 users, how did you actually, do you remember how you got them specifically?
I don't exactly know. So I think in terms of downloads, for those early downloads on Google Code, I think it was a mixture of what I mentioned with those websites and dropping links and just generating early interest, and potentially the user groups I was speaking at and generating early interest there. I think that's probably how that happened. And the contributions, I think it's primarily just people that grew out of that pool or came short time after that then looked at it, and the solution was a 99% match, but not a 100% match for what they had. And then they felt that just like I was faced with a decision in the beginning, is it worth to rewrite the whole thing, or should I just try and push a small change there? They saw that the effort to rewrite the whole thing would be much bigger than just pushing a small change. And then I think that's how the first contributions then happened. And and they were all over the place, like some very interesting areas sometimes I had not thought about myself, or environments I had not used, or and so it was very, very interesting to work with them.
And did you then, by the way, have like a couple of, let's say, core, very nerdy, hardcore core contributors, or was it pretty much split up? Whenever someone worked on their local problem, which didn't exist yet, they had a contribution. How did that work out?
People would come and contribute something, and once that's integrated, their 99% match would then be 100% match, and then they would be happy and they would just go back to their own thing. And maybe a few years later, some would come back if they're in some other environment and would then again contribute. So I had some users that definitely were repeat contributors, as would be much more active than others. But that was okay. Like that's just part of the deal, I guess. You offer this as a present, and then somebody adjusts it a little bit so it's good for them, and then they go and play with that, and you never hear from them again, and that's okay too. I think that's just part of the transaction. It's part of the licensing model that was chosen as well with Apache 2. I think it's rather permissive, and so you can go and do your thing, and even if you choose to modify it internally, you don't necessarily have to return your changes. So I don't know if there were any private forks that would never return. I don't know.
Was there ever any tension you had with any of the contributors? So when I think of tension, for example, I know that for whatever reason, Spring folks, Hibernate folks, they have these online battles where they kind of battle each other out on GitHub issues, whatever. Did you ever have some sort of toxic, let's call it toxic, discussions or battles, or because it went, contributions went awry and someone insulted someone, any of these sort of problems?
No, there's never really been some kind of behavior at the human level which I thought was problematic. There may have been technical disagreements where we don't really see or have the same vision for what the solution to a certain problem may have been, but there's never been any kind of insults or anything where I thought this is something that requires intervention or should be dealt with. No, I think that's been okay, but it's a much, much smaller community, of course. People have been using Flyway like it was out of the box for a very long time, because the scope it had was sufficient and there didn't need to be that much done. And with the focus on quality from the beginning, there weren't that many issues actually over the years, despite the rather large user base. And so that I think is much easier than a much broader project like Spring or Hibernate, where you're going to have a much wider set of problems that you're attempting to solve. And then, of course, a wider audience interacting there as well.
You already mentioned briefly maintainer burnout at some point early on. Was that a really big thing where you thought at some point, hey, scrap it, enough with Flyway? Did you ever reach that point?
It's actually a thought that crossed my mind that it was one of the options. Like I came, yes, the thing. So the early years is not much happening. There's like 1,000 downloads the first year, but it kind of kept on going. So it grew about steadily about 250 to 300% every year. So it starts small, but then eventually it becomes bigger and bigger. And sure.
By the way, when we say downloads, you mean you had to look at the, I don't know, Maven repository, and you saw the downloads.
So those were things that were following, and then on Google Code at the time you could see that as well. But then later, But good that you mentioned the Maven repository. This was, for example, a nudge from some users in the beginning as well. When you have to push this on Maven Central, and then kind of did the work to do all that. But yes, so I was tracking the downloads there to kind of see how that was evolving, and so that was interesting. And as it grew over the years, so did the user base, so did the amount of issues that were being reported, and the amount of work being associated with that. And so you have to think, this was purely a hobby project at this point in time. So regular day job, get home, and well, that's your evening, that's your weekend, that's what you do. You kind of sit down and work on issue from random user in random country at the end of the world and try and fix it. So then, and it's fun, but at some point there was a little bit like the novelty is wearing off here. Like I kind of want a bit of free time as well, like, because the amount of free time I had in the beginning was high, but as the load increased, my free time kept decreasing as well. So I thought, well, something's got to give here. This either has to start generating some money, or I have to stop it, but something's got to change. This cannot continue this way, that it'll just endlessly eat up all my time without seeing anything in return for it, because it's just unsustainable. It doesn't work like that in the long term. So that pressure definitely mounted, and in the phase before that, as I mentioned, it also led to some unfortunate compromises, which I later regretted, where I was slacking off a little bit in terms of being hard with accepting contributions, and unfortunately some of those I ended up needing a few years to correct afterwards, because a big part of the design of a library like that as well is that once something is out there, it's very difficult to take it away. Once a feature is being used by a very large number of people that have integrated in automated processes and in products, you cannot just take it away. So it takes a long deprecation cycle and documentation cycle of how you can then nudge people towards whatever successor of the ill-conceived feature you had at the time you would like them to use, and then you can finally think about getting rid of things. So mistakes were much more expensive in the design of a library like that than in just regular application software. You fix it, deploy the new version, and you're done.
Yeah. How much time specifically do you think you spent then when you said you came home after your day job? Do I have to imagine you literally spent the evenings throughout the week and the weekends and working on Flyway? So we're talking, I don't know, 60, 70 hour weeks at that time?
No. It depends on the period. Like in the beginning, a little traction, rather a little bit, maybe bursts of motivation, but then sometimes I reached plateaus where it was enough for what I needed. And there were also phases where, there would be weeks at a time where I wouldn't touch it or just briefly look at it or fix small things. But then, of course, as the user base grew, you couldn't keep those gaps anymore. There was just too much coming in. So you needed more time to invest in that. There is definitely been phases where it was multiple nights a week and, let's say evenings a week, and then some hours on the weekends and all that went into that.
Yeah, but still, it's a good point. I mean, as you said, you could have, I don't know, went to a nice beer garden here in Munich or do whatever you liked. You went surfing, I don't know what, and then you sit at home and, fix random stuff for random people you don't actually know.
but it's rewarding as well. So it's not like it's just a chore and it's painful. You also get a lot of satisfaction back. It's an incredible feeling once you've written something and other people are actually using it and they're happy when they use it, and you may get the occasional positive email or sentence somewhere in the issue tracker that says that it really helped, and this gives a lot of gratification as well. So yeah, it's a bit self-serving also to put in the time, because you really get something out of it as well. So it's not a punishment somebody else imposed upon me.
By the way, that's a good reminder of when you use the open source projects, give them, if just a nice feeling, write some nice lines and make people happy. I mean, do not just consume open source libraries, but try to give something back as well.
I would also dare to extend that to other things in life as well. I think we're very eager to criticize lots of people and stay silent for positive feedback. And I think it's always nice in daily life as well to tell people they did a good job or it was awesome or thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, taking that, and you said the workload increased, and I mean, it was just a side project. And at what time did you think, hey, this could be a business rather than just a side project? What happened?
Well, I never thought it could be a business. At some point, I thought it had to be a business, or something had to happen.
Okay.
For this to continue, and so this must have been, I don't know, 4 or 5 years in. So not overnight. Like, it took a long time, but yes, then I reached this point where I thought, yes, something needs to change. But how? How can you make a business with a jar file, like an open source library in the JVM ecosystem? There were so few examples of things that had successfully turned into business. You had, for the longest time, you had in the open source world, you had Red Hat that managed to build a big business, but that's because there's such huge complexity associated with an entire Linux distribution. My whole premise was to make it as simple as possible. So there was a direct contradiction there in trying to create complexity to then pay people to solve it. So it was rather difficult. So I had to go on some kind of a search of what can be done and how it's somehow. Could I find a model? This was a little bit, it was all new. Like there were very little things out there that did that. So at first I tried to follow the Red Hat model and thought, okay, well, I would sell support subscriptions and these 3 tiers, I think, with number of calls. And I don't know what I thought at the time that could go into there just to see. I had to try something. And it was the best idea I could come up with at the time. And it wasn't a big success. I had something like 5 companies that paid me for a year or for the first or the second year.
By the way, does that mean email support, or could they phone you in while you were consulting and then you
email support.
Okay, email support. Okay.
Phoning in never made any sense because everybody was spread all around the world. And so with all the time zones, it didn't make any sense. But email support was also sufficient in terms of interaction. But yeah, so that really didn't go anywhere because not only did few companies subscribe, but then they hardly renewed because they found they never used it because they didn't really have the need for those problems. So that obviously was not the way forward. So the search had to continue. And then I tried something else after, which was sponsored feature development, where I would look at the issue tracker and I thought, well, if you want this one implemented, you have to we have to talk about the price, and then potentially we can get this work done and integrated. And so,
how did that work?
Slightly better, but it was still unsustainable. It worked because I got then some lump sums of money for implementing some things. I think one of the things was the support for the copy statement in Postgres, or those kind of targeted things that once they're done, they're in there, it works. But the problem is that I was getting money for one-time work, but I would still have to support this over the years. So and I didn't just want to bloat the library with or the CLI or with tons of features that just because they would generate one-time revenue. So it was, again, something I tried and then figured out, No, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. The search must continue, slightly better, but it must continue. And meanwhile, as all this is happening, the pressure just keeps on growing.
Yeah.
Like I've got this user base that keeps on expanding, and more issues and being raised, and questions on Stack Overflow and other things that need to be answered. So that was the burden just kept increasing. So the pressure to find a solution increased as well. And so I'd already a few years prior started looking into what other software businesses were doing by attending some dedicated conferences to that. So they're quite different to our typical JVM conferences. I went to this thing in Boston called the Business of Software Conference, and it's about pretty much everything about software except the technical part.
Right.
And so that was very interesting for me. I didn't bring a lot of value to the other attendees, but the other attendees brought a lot of value to me at the time. Just kind of hearing what kind of businesses they were running and how they were doing things. And this was about, around 2012, 2013. And so that was interesting because I got to know a few people there, and that was a good eye opener. And there was always this pressure, you got to have a software as a service solution. There it's easy to charge, but I didn't have that. I had this automatically downloaded jar file from Maven Central. so we're quite far from that software as a service thing. So I couldn't quite kind of bring those things together. I'd also gathered in the meantime some experience with actually selling software as a service by creating some other product in parallel called BoxFuse. This was some deployment tool where you could basically, for Play or Spring, or you could just have a jar file, and from that tool would infer your Spring config, would read whatever endpoints you've got configured and ports and all that, and just set everything up for you on AWS with load balancers and databases and all that. So I had that. It wasn't a huge success. At its peak, it made maybe $2,000 something a month. So not a huge thing, but a good first dabble into what could be done and what helped there. So that was interesting to kind of gain some experience with that side. But this was still very much a software as a service thing. So a bit more experience, but still not able to build the bridge in. But gradually, I became more and more exposed to this entire entrepreneurship world in the software business. And one of the communities I found at the time was indie hackers. Indiehackers.com has since I think pivoted a bit, but they used to have a very interesting podcast, and I believe they still have directory of companies where people can then just present their company and pretty openly say how much revenue they have, the kind of business model they have, and so on. And you can sort these company listings by revenue as well. And by digging through that, I found something in the Ruby world by some guy named Mike Perham. And he had this thing called Sidekick it's basically background job execution for the Ruby world. And and he had done an interview with indie hackers that are linked from that product page. And as I'm reading that, he's basically describing how he was going through similar steps that I was, and ended up releasing a pro and an enterprise edition of his a Ruby gem and what he was doing there in the server to that then ended up being quite successful. And within 4 years, he was making something like $1 million by himself with 0 employees. Mm-hmm. So I thought, that's interesting. Let's read it again. And I went through this whole thing again, and I thought, yeah, that's got to be the way forward. That's what I got to do. Like, there's got to be some kind of way to have a pro and an enterprise edition that people will somehow pay some kind of fee, probably yearly, because monthly seems kind of difficult with automated processes that they would have to pay for along some kind of usage metric. But again, it's never been done in that space, so no idea what could be used to create this kind of value to then have some revenue coming in that would give the project a sustainable future, and potentially also a little bit of payment for myself, which I had not really gotten up to that point with that. So that was a bit the pivotal moment, I'd say, is finding that interview and then really having the eye opener, and then kind of realizing that I reached a local maximum. I was at top of the hill, and all of a sudden saw the next mountain I actually needed to climb to get there.
How long did you spend, just time-wise, roughly, climbing these other mountains where you said, for example, okay, I'm going to try out support and see how that works? And how long did you give yourself like a time box where you said, hey, I shouldn't try to make it support really work for like a year if I can't make it work? Did you have that in mind?
I didn't time box it beforehand. As I said, I very much stumbled into this whole thing. It's not been. It's been. If you have a range between perfectly planned and executed and Forrest Gump style, I'm much more towards the Forrest Gump style of things and how I stumbled into all that. I guess I just gave it a go in my mind for a while, and this while turned out to be, I don't know, just I think a year and something, where I saw that whatever was there wasn't really growing, and renewables weren't coming in either. So I thought, okay, well, this has run its course. I need to kind of find something else. And with the sponsored feature development, that went on maybe also for probably a year or two, something like that, until I saw, well, it's generating some revenue, but it's not enough. There's no escape velocity here. I cannot get to a point where this will be self-sustaining at some point. And in fact, you're still doing just some kind of consultancy just for your or time-based work, pretty much, or value-based work. But at least it's not something automated. It's not the something that works while you sleep kind of product. And so that's really where I wanted to get at, and I had to realize those were just stepping stones, but definitely not the end solution.
Out of interest, have you ever been to MicroConf? Do you know MicroConf?
Yes. I've been to MicroConf a bunch of times. The last time was in 2 years ago. I've been in that was in the US. I've been in the US as well in 19, and a few years before that as well. Very, very, very useful, because that's also been, even though I became exposed to business of software because it was something that Joel Spolsky was involved at the time. Joel Spolsky, who ended up doing Stack Overflow and Trello and a bunch of other things later as well. But I was really into his blog of how he was describing his products and the things he'd done by the end of by the early 2000s. There I was really very keen on his writing. And so that's how I became exposed to the business of software. But then I realized that the business of software was a little bit too advanced for me. It was for companies, I would say 10, 20 employees onwards. And I was at a smaller scale facing slightly different problems. And MicroConf was much more at eye level. It was something when I came there, well, it's the two-person company doing kitchen countertop design software that you never thought could be a business, but it works great. And there's one guy doing some random thing over there. Like the last MicroConf, you meet incredible people, because these are us, especially for us coming from a technical side of things. There are businesses out there you wouldn't imagine a work about. Like one guy, he was just making teleprompter software for iPhones and making a great living out of that, and really interesting things that you wouldn't think of. And so I really liked MicroConf for that, to really meet interesting people, and you can be very, very open, because you can pretty much share everything, because you're not direct competitors. Everybody's in some small niche somewhere, and so if you share the business of your kitchen countertop design software, well, the guy with a teleprompter, well, you can be as open as you want. You're not in the direct market, so that fits very, very well. And MicroConf was also the trigger for me to, for a few years, I ran this entrepreneurship group here in Munich, and that was very, very interesting. I think if we take a step back, what I liked about both business software and MicroConf is that the businesses there were self-funded. And this was a big trajectory choice in choosing what kind of software company I wanted to have, or what software company I wanted Flyway eventually to turn into. Is something I always appreciated, kind of the bootstrapping. You did it yourself, and you worked up the hard way, but you kept 100% ownership, kind of tying back to the dictatorship thing of the beginning, but then in company form. And I always really like those aspects to stay in control, because a big part for me also of trying that software as a service business, and then later with Flyway, was to be independent of any kind of employer. I wanted to set my own rules and do my own thing, and this is something that I valued much more than absolute growth, I would say, which might be something attached to venture capital trajectory, where you're still accountable to someone, and I didn't want that. Many people were trying to push me into that direction, where it's something, but deep down inside I thought, no, it's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it to be free of those constraints and not change one set of constraints for another. So MicroConf I've really, really enjoyed over the years, and the entrepreneurship group in Munich was my kind of nano version of that, where we would then be very open and be able to share our learnings with people trying to build their own software as a service or software-based businesses.
To add to your example, I went to MicroConf Europe a couple of years ago before my kids were born, where I still had plenty of time to travel. What I found fascinating, I think there was at some point, as like the hallway track, we had different. They had different tables where you could inform yourself about, I don't know, email marketing, different topics essentially. And I was standing at the email marketing booth, so to speak, and there was a professor. I think he was a professor at an American uni. I would say 60 plus years already old. And he was quite shy. He said, well, yeah, I built a VBA plugin for Excel, something, and it makes him roughly $100,000 a year plus, because he, I don't know, for his specific field, every colleague uses it kind of, and he sold it, and that's it. And he was just then said, my problem is I don't really have a tool to email every one of my customers. So he had like huge success for him, kind of. He didn't even know from a technical perspective how to email all of his customers, because he didn't have a mailing list or whatever. He just tracked probably in some sheet. And it's interesting that when you then come from a technical perspective and you're in consulting projects, and then you think, oh, we need to have 5,000 tools, like from Kafka to these 10,000 other things to make a successful project. On the other hand, you have like one-man shops who make huge amounts of money with very simple tech at the end of the day, but filling a customer need. And this is great to see at such conferences, kind of.
And simple is a feature.
Yeah.
Because I think all the complexity solutions that are out there are just overwhelming and are more than you need. Prior to doing all this with Flyway and the rest, I used to be I was employed at two different companies early in my career, and they were really merchants of complexity with the solutions they were selling to their customers and how they're doing it. And I got a strong aversion to that. It's something that I thought, no, this is not how I want my software to be, and it's not how I want the software world in general to be. I think it's so easy to build complexity into a product, and having something distilled to something simple but still yet usable and adding value is actually not so easy, and is tremendously refreshing when you encounter it, where you then have something where you think, finally, don't need 3 consultants and 5 months of work to get this set up. It just works.
Yeah,
and I think that's something that's very strong in these small companies where you don't have a choice. You don't have the customers, the consultants to send out to the customers. So you have to have something that works like that.
So we're back to you saw an indie hackers in the interview. That's a business model you could work out. But then I can imagine there were essentially the two next challenges. Let's start with the first one. Let's say you have a normal version, you have a pro version. How did you decide what features go into which version of Flyway?
Oh, the challenge started even before that. The challenge started with, how can I even get this to a point where I can begin realistically selling licenses to this? And so this took the better part of a year to get that sorted. I found this. First, I had to look for a lawyer that could then was knowledgeable about all this and at my level. Because you have huge companies, but they'll bankrupt you. They'll charge you 700 euros an hour for specialized knowledge there. And that just didn't work. So I needed like the kind of one-man show I was having, but as a lawyer on the other hand, but I was technical enough and that understood this type of business and that would be familiar with that. And this was not easy to find because a lot of, we're such outliers in the market. So there's not a huge legal market for this as well on the other side. So that took a bit of searching where you would get into the offices of lawyers with lots of marble and okay, this is just going to be expensive. And then you ask them if they can do it and they say yes, but you realize they haven't fully understood the nuances of the fact that this is kind of relying on Apache 2 with contributions from random people and they're all over the world. And what does that imply in terms of IP right? There's a lot of complexity because you're kind of dealing with lots of different laws and how and jurisdictions and how that kind of fits together. And then I finally found this guy here in Munich. He doesn't practice that anymore, unfortunately, but he was perfect for that. He had his own GitHub account as a lawyer. He understood.
How did you find him?
Google search, I guess, or
right.
I don't know, or somehow kind of stumbled upon him. And then we had, I had one assistant at the time. She's still with me now. And then she did the research, and then we kind of set up a set of interviews with these different law practices to kind of see would we be a good match or not. And then after going through the others and finally found this guy, where I thought, okay, this is just a normal guy like you and I, where we can talk and we're gonna get to a good workable solution here. But getting to that good workable solution involved quite a bit of work as well, because it was we had to kind of clean up the IP, which I hadn't really thought about before. I had accepted these contributions over the years from many people from all over, but I didn't really have any rights specifically to relicense them at will under some commercial licenses if I wanted to. Not strictly necessary. You can have some kind of product where you have a core product and purely like plugins that you tag onto it, and you don't need to relicense any of that. But I thought it's important to kind of secure this now because it's only gonna get harder from now on. So there were two phases for that. One was plugging the leak and then kind of fixing everything that was out there. So plugging the leak was drafting a CLA so that all future contributions would then agree that basically they would transfer the rights to me as well of their for their contributions. So that's something that's a little bit of a barrier, but some people didn't like that being presented with a CLA, but many people didn't care. They were happy as long as the end result was that the product that was a 99% match for them 100%. Then turned into a 100% match when their contribution would be integrated. So that was okay. And then there was the part of tracking down all existing contributors. Very difficult on GitHub because accounts have been renamed. Accounts have been deleted. Accounts have no public email address. You've got no messaging feature. So that took a long time to try and find who did what, and then really sorting things out to make sure that I would get the approval down to every single last line of code for everything that was there. And then, presenting everybody with a choice. People may not respond immediately.
And you really had to get it down to every single last line of code and contribution?
It's what I wanted to. It's what I wanted to eliminate any kind of doubt from that. And most of the time it worked okay. I think the vast majority of the people that I contacted were fine with it. I offered a choice. Like, I can either we can either relicense it, but I'll promise you it also stay Apache 2. But I also want to be able to sell commercial versions of that in the future. Or we can also remove your contributions if you feel uncomfortable with that. And I think something like 95% accepted, and then some didn't. And then I think I had some Apache Hive, or I don't know what the database was that wasn't widely used, where the maintainer preferred not to go down that path. So in the next release of Flyway, I just removed that functionality. And then some smaller bits where I couldn't contact the actual maintainers, then I ended up rewriting them.
Right.
They were usually smaller things, and there were alternative ways to solve the problem, and then I just got around it that way to kind of have everything clean. So that was the preparatory work before even being able to decide what kind of features I wanted somewhere. But it was important to do.
It was important. By the way, I've been stuck at that point myself in the past, where you have some sort of a side project. And for example, I had something where it had some tax involvement. So it solved a real problem with taxes. But once you do something with taxes, and in Germany, you have to get a lawyer to figure out if you're breaking tax laws or anything with your software. When you go to these big law firms who say they can give you an answer, they will, as you said, they will go ahead. They will tell you it's 700 euros per hour. We need 10 hours to give you an initial gut feeling of how this project can actually go, if it's going to work out or not. And you're thinking, dude, 10 hours, like 7,000 euros just to give me some sort of initial proposal. What kind of pricing is that? You go to these fancy offices, as you said, you sit at fancy chairs with fancy suits, with fancy everything. They don't fully understand you, and you have to work this out. And this is a huge barrier, actually. It's a huge barrier. And it's interesting that you say this, because I have been there before, and it's such a turnoff to sit in these law firms where you have to pay this amount of money just to get started, just to even, just to get started. That was my rant. Sorry for the day.
It's not a rant, it's true, and it's a real problem out there. So if there are lawyers out there working in this field, please comment on the podcast, because we need you. We need more of you.
We really do need you. Right. But say you jumped over the initial hurdle, and we're thinking about features. How did you then decide, hey, what should go into the pro version or into the commercial version, and what should stay in the open source version?
So at this point, you have to think we're somewhere in the year 2017. The project started in 2010, so we're about 7 years in. And there is a solid number of issues in the issue tracker, of feature requests that have been raised over the years. And so with them, upvotes and comments and things that allowed me to gauge the interest. And that could be combined with my experience that I'd accrued over the years of what kind of worked, and also what would appeal to which audience. Because I knew by that point the marketing wasn't really being done by myself anymore. By 2017, you had a lot of people at conferences talking about Flyway, and they were basically, to a certain extent, doing my marketing for me. And I never wanted to lose them. It was important. They were really a primary vehicle for spreading the word. And I'm very, very grateful that they did it. And this was hugely helpful. And so one thing that was always important there is to make sure that whatever features this audience would need would have to stay free, so that they would have an easy access and make it easy for them to promote it. I don't want to make it hard for them to promote it. And on the other hand, I had a clear set of features where I thought, well, that's something there's no way the hobby guy or girl at home will need to use this. Like, never. This is big company stuff. And so those were kind of easy. And then there were some in the middle where I kind of had to use like gut feeling. And so this IP cleanup took quite a while. And so we're talking like beginning of the fall 2017. I thought, well, at some point I kind of had features that had accumulated in the open source software, and I was kind of holding back the release of the new major version to be able to do that. I thought, something's got to do, because it's time to kind of put out a major version, and I think this is something that I should integrate with that, because when I was putting out major versions, I would get a bit of press, which was good. Like I would have articles on D-Zone, or sometimes some of the specialized, maybe there would be something I could get up on InfoQ, or maybe some of the German Java related publications, or I would post it on Hacker News, or different forums to kind of generate the press and kind of use the moment. And so I thought that I have to be able to ride that wave and combine it. And I looked at the issue tracker, and there were a few simple things. One was Oracle has got this tool called SQL Plus. It's in CLI, and it's got its own kind of built-in commands that aren't really SQL. They're just things that instruct the CLI to kind of change a mode into something, or visually change something. And a lot of companies that use Oracle have those kind of scripts that include those kind of statements. Because I think if we go back a bit to competition, the biggest competition that I saw actually was not Liquibase, it was just SQL scripts and doing it yourself and just typing and copy-pasting SQL statements. That was, I think, the biggest market share to be gained in my mind. And so I had to make it easy for those people to be able to adopt what I had created there. And so the SQL Plus thing was quite a nice little thing, because it was a rather low-hanging fruit. Didn't even need to support all the instructions. Some instructions that were in there were much more common than others. And so I wrote this emulation layer for these instructions that would then, as I was passing the SQL file, would not send it to the database, but would replicate whatever SQL Plus would do for that command, and then would then execute the next statements. And that was the first real pro feature that I had. And because I was sure nobody at home will need this. So did this, sure. And then I thought, well, and I think I had some other tiny little thing. And there are two small features. And then I thought, well, I still want to segment between pro and enterprise to kind of see how I could, just to gauge the market and see what would be doable. And also had to make a decision at what price point.
Yes, that my next question.
To set these things. So there is Mike Perham with Sidekick had this interesting remark somewhere that many companies have some natural threshold for approvals for credit cards. And in his experience, it was somewhere around $1,000. If you stayed below that, you can get by at the team level in a lot of companies. And other than that, you may need further approval in the management hierarchy. So I thought, well, that's a good point to start. Going to use that one for the Pro edition. And then the Enterprise, I thought, well, going to add some things that I thought first doubling. And then I think I just randomly just tripled it or something. I had 3 times that. And I still have to find features for it to kind of put in. So I had that pricing model beginning to develop, but I still didn't quite have a metric along which to charge, which was also because nobody had done it. And so I thought, well, what can I charge for my jar file, for my thing there? And then I had the idea, well, how is value created? What works? What doesn't work? And then I early on had this idea of charging per database schema. But then I thought, well, I kind of like my development environment to kind of be dynamic and spin stuff up with Docker and have the test environments that I can be dynamic. There's got to be some tweaking here. And then eventually I decided, okay, we're just going to simplify dev and test for free and just charge for prod where there is not as much fluctuation or rarely fluctuation in the number of database schemas. And then I just kind of picked 10 as what you would get for that $950, and that seemed all right. And I thought, well, how am I going to monitor that? Just going to give up and work with the honesty system before I have to install some things on production machines of customers. I don't want any access to that. Yeah. I don't want anything calling home. This is also the part, like trying to sell software like I would like to buy myself and not include, I don't want a CrowdStrike thing happening to me. It only include things that I would like to actually buy myself. So very important, not make the experience worse than it would be for free for users of the community edition. There's a small friction with the payment, but other than that, it should be as pleasant as the other. So that was very important. And then for the enterprise edition, I had to think a little bit out of the box in terms of features of what I wanted to do, what could really add value. And the thing that I ended up doing was tying back to what I was telling you before with the testing. The testing was really problematic of those different ancient versions of certain database. And I thought, this is not for my evangelists on stage that are they're using the latest Postgres and they're easy, but it's a major pain in the ass to support this ancient version of Oracle that only runs in certain VM or something. I'm not picking on Oracle specifically, but there's different, basically old versions of software that may need old operating systems and other things to kind of run and just difficult to use there. So I thought, well, there's got to be some price to that for me to maintain that compatibility. And so from a code perspective, it's very easy. All I added was if statements, that if version is then if it's older than that and you don't have the right license, throw an exception, and otherwise kind of just execute the code. So from a code perspective, there was not a lot, but there was, of course, a lot of burden in maintaining the infrastructure behind that and staying motivated to maintain all these old things I actually wanted to get rid of. And so older version of the databases, support for those became one feature. And another feature I introduced in the enterprise edition was older versions of the JVM. It was annoying to support Java 6 and 7 when Java 8 was out already and newer, and I still had to kind of restrict myself to what I had available there. And I thought, well, that's got to come with a certain price as well, because again, my evangelists and people speaking at conferences will never need that. They'll be on the latest version, so big company stuff as well. So that also flowed into the enterprise value add, so to speak. And the final of the three things was support. So I would offer email support to both pro and enterprise customers, but for the pro customers I would offer it in English, and for the enterprise customers I would offer it in English, French, Dutch, German, and Spanish, because those just happen to be the languages I speak. But nobody knew that, so that's how I did that. And so there was I sold that as a value add for the enterprise edition as well, and at the end it also helped some customers, because I had some French customers that could then communicate with me in French, and that worked well for them. And so we had that there. So I had to kind of somehow find value adds, but I think it worked out okay.
So we had all of that with the different packages, the different value adds. You came up with a price. Please tell people that before you put that up on a website, you were kind of not scared, but kind of anxious if that is going to work out. Was that the case, or were you just pretty much sold from the beginning, hey, now this is what it's going to be? And
no, I really didn't know how it was going to turn out. Because, for example, Ider from Juke, he had started a commercial edition a few years prior, I think in 14, and he had some very negative comments of people, how dare you charge for this and all, in the beginning. So that was that calmed down over the years, but in the beginning there was quite a strong backlash he had to deal with. So I was definitely quite concerned about that. And the other part I was concerned with was basically the risks of open source, of having a fork, of somebody deciding that hey, you know what, I'm just going to take this and whatever you've implemented commercially, I'm just going to replicate for free, and then all the work that I'd put in prior would just kind of evaporate, and I wouldn't be able to monetize it somehow. So that was a real risk. So and it's not just theoretical. It happened to Query DSL. They had that, where they tried to offer support for commercial databases as a paid add-on, and then somebody just replicated that, and their business went away.
Right.
So it was very real. So the step I took at the time as well was to remove the tests from the open source version. This is something that very few people noticed because I had a very, very high consumer to contributor ratio. And this was a little bit of an insurance, again, playing into that fear of what might happen, at least to make it significantly harder to fork the project and deal with that. Because at the end, a project like Flyway, conceptually, it's very simple. But why is it useful? Is because there is a million edge cases that have been dealt with. All tiny bits that only fail under specific circumstances or a specific version that have been worked around and all that, so that from an end user perspective, it's turnkey, it just works, and behind the scenes, kind of everything's going to be cleaned up for you automatically. And so removing the tests for those kind of makes it much, much harder to make sure something wouldn't break in the future. So I used that as an insurance policy, and it turned out all right. Like there was very little backlash. So I came to the day where it was the release announcement, was sometime early December 17, forgot the exact date, but somewhere, and maybe potentially first week of December. So not ideal. People are slowly getting to Christmas party mode and all that. So, but I thought it just got to come out. Like I've waited long enough. I've had this huge phase with the IP and all that. It's got to come out. And so as we're there, I'm releasing this, and then it's the big unknown. Like it's part of the announcements, like I would usually do with the major versions, that now there is also these commercial versions. They send it out there, and yeah, it was all right. Like not a lot of negative, the usual feedback. And then what really, really helped was, I think maybe 3 or 4 days in, somebody bought a pro license, and I thought, oh, this is fantastic.
That was your first sale.
Yeah. I've actually met the person as well a few years later at a conference and thanked him very much, because this was such an important confidence booster. This going from 0 to 1. That was huge, because I had no idea. Maybe nobody would buy my simple little statement emulator for the SQL Plus statements. It grew to more features over time, but that was the beginning. And then these other things with the older versions of the databases and JVMs and all that. But yeah, so that was a huge confidence booster. And then I actually had a few more sales that month that kind of really shot up the revenue to something like, I forgot the exact figure, but maybe $20,000 in the first month. So that was
in the first month, right?
So that was incredible.
Right.
That was incredible. That was
that must
unbelievable.
have felt incredible.
Yeah, it's surreal. It felt surreal. Yeah, it was terrific.
How did that continue then? I mean, so first month 20,000, and then what happened? I mean, sales wise and revenue wise.
It kept on going like that. It was pure madness. It was growing by $20,000 to $50,000 in annual recurring revenue every single month.
Every single month.
Yes, it was ridiculous. I'd priced it so that the highest tiers, because again, pricing. So the initial price was this $950, and then $29.50 or so for the enterprise, and then I'd capped it at 100 schemas when it would be unlimited, because I didn't feel comfortable charging for more, also because I thought it's also well below the yearly salary of a developer, so it's not worth to start doing in-house, and even for a large company. But then soon after, I had this company coming to me, and they had 8,000 schemas, and I thought, well, bummer, I guess you take the 100 unlimited license here that I have, and then realize that. But that was still fantastic, because at the end it was $30,000. I think I don't know if it was, we're just about to have dinner, and then the email comes in. All right, well, just had a $30,000 raise annually here, because it's got to come in next year as well. It was surreal. And it just kept on going like that. So it was fantastic.
But wait, you sold in dollars, or did you have country-specific pricing or anything like that?
You have to pick your battles. And it is easier for a European customer to accept paying in dollars, or a European customer would be more used to paying dollars than it would be for an American customer to pay in euros. And in terms of keeping the complexity low of the pricing and the business, I opted to have a single currency to start. And so I picked dollars just because you can't fight every fight from day one. And so that's what I went for. So yes, being based here in Germany, you have then some exchange rate risk and a few things. But my operation was so lean that the exchange rate risk really didn't matter that much, or it was not the kind of thing I needed to optimize for at that point in time. Mm-hmm. So that was, it really felt as if this had been a rocket with propellant and you just needed to light the fuse, because it's as if the pressure had been mounting for so many years and now it just kind of was getting released. So that was incredible. I still can't believe it how well that went. It was very, very interesting.
So you're sitting there, let's say 6 months in, whatever, and the revenue increases, and by that time it surpasses your freelancing money and maybe potentially. What were you thinking next? Were you thinking, hey, now I've got a rocket ship, I need to cling on that rocket? Or did you think, hey, we're going to do that for the next 5 years and make it even bigger and bigger and bigger? Or did you then already have in mind some sort of a nagging feeling where you thought, maybe I should also be thinking of, at the end of the day, selling it at some time, but I'm going to keep on clinging to make it, to see how far, how high the rocket goes?
I think we have to take a step back here. So I had this second product, Box Fuse, and by the time that kind of began generating some revenue, and so we're talking 2014, 15, early 16, I had those other adventures that I tried with the support and the paid features. I'd already gradually wound down the consultancy business. Initially, I was still doing 5 days a week, then I went to 4, to 3, to 2, and eventually stopped doing it. In parallel to that, to finance that, I'd begin selling a continuous delivery course. There was a 2-day course that I was doing for companies I would have like 10 to, I'd capped it at 16 participants. And that was a very lucrative business to finance that transition phase, because it was very stressful when you had the customer, because I was charging somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 euros per day. So very lucrative. 2-day course, maybe 12,000, 14,000 euros. So very good money, huge value add for the customer as well. So for them, if it allowed 2 or 3 or 4 teams where they would send and people participating to not spend months going down the wrong path, but then course correct earlier, they would recoup their money in no time. So it was a very big win-win. Very stressful, because once you're there, it's basically you're on your feet morning till evening. You have to be super sharp, because people will tell you about their problems in different kind of projects, industries you've never heard about, and you have to contextualize and distill that very quickly to provide answers that make sense, or suggestions that make sense. So very stressful, but very lucrative. And so I could do maybe 5 or 6 or 7 of those a year, and that would kind of keep me afloat financially for the year. So I would have like 10, 12, 20 days of work in the year with that course, and that would finance my year. And so that kind of helped kind of bridge that gap and give me room for those experiments. I was playing my own venture capitalist, in fact. Not millions, but small budget, but enough for me with a lean operation to try those different things and stay afloat, while still reducing the time involvement that I had with the classic consultancy work that I had before, to be able to invest then in those things that I wanted to try and potentially turn into businesses. So that kind of really helped to kind of have that transition there. And then I gradually then wound those courses down as I had the revenue with Flyway increasing, also because they were very stressful, and Flyway was in itself also becoming something that I had to be more careful to manage about, because as I said, the audience and grew 250% year over year. So I was at that point having tens of millions of downloads a year. So you cannot make mistakes anymore like you can make in the early days, because if you make a mistake in the API or you introduce something there, then it's immediately used by a huge chunk of the industry, and so you have to tread very carefully and weigh design decisions very, very carefully at that point. So so that I kind of wound those down and could transition like that with the revenue.
Mm-hmm. Very good points. Okay, so but then at that point, what I've asked you before, I mean, you've already wound up consulting and the trainings and whatever, and basically you saw that your own VC investments finally paid off, so to speak. Did you then think, okay, now I'm just going to keep going with it. Let's see how far it goes, or what was the plan going forward? Seeing that the first 3, 4, 5, 6 very successful months, which you couldn't believe.
Well, super interesting. Like it felt like a real privilege to be able to experience that. It's something I feel like very few people get to experience, to kind of be hanging on to a rocket ship like that. Like it was incredible. So and it was a very steep learning curve, but very interesting. And so I was enjoying that ride a lot. Also very stressful and things, but also very, very enjoying where it was going. And no idea. It was like the final frontier for me. It was like kind of going beyond anything I'd done, both in terms of revenue and scope. And so that was really interesting phase. And and again, coming from that bootstrapped mindset for business, I'd never really thought about selling the business as such. It's not something that actively crossed my mind. I've always been a very strong believer in what 37 Signals had been advocating for the longest time, that you kind of build the best company you can for yourself, and so that you have something that you can keep on enjoying for years and years and years. Now that you worked for it and you finally have something that you always wanted and it's finally working like you want, why get rid of it? Keep on enjoying it for many, many years. So no plans to sell at that point. Really enjoyed the ride. There were some parts that were beginning to come that I didn't enjoy as much. There were things coming up like purchase departments, where I really tried with my lawyer to have a license agreement as fair as possible, with as little thing in there as we need, just a bare minimum, totally fair. I even customers had access to the full source code. There were all kinds of provisions in case I would go bankrupt, that they would be able to keep on developing it in-house, so they would not be stuck, really, really fair. And then you would still kind of get some companies saying, all right, we're going to purchase it with a purchase order, and here's, by the way, the changes to your terms, and they struck everything out and replaced it with a ton of other things. So I thought, no, come on, guys, really trying to have that, or negotiation on price. What I really didn't want was to have the entire stakes and strippers dance while you're selling your software. I wanted to have something with open, transparent pricing. Everybody pays the same. It's published, and either you think it's worth it and you buy it, or you think it's not worth it and you keep on using the open source version, or you build your own or whatever, but no haggling, and just fair, straight price for everybody around the world, same price for everybody. And that I found increasingly difficult as well when they were trying to hang on me, and I thought on the other hand, and it was a problem for the technical teams at the companies on the other side as well, because they saw it was fair and they just wanted to use it, and they had the middle man, or that department in the middle, that really didn't understand what the value was, and were just trying. Probably they were just doing their job and being measured on how far they managed to push down the list price and being rewarded on that, or I don't know what the compensation structure must have been, but probably something like that, where they're just doing their job. But yeah, it was one of the parts that came up then that I really didn't enjoy, and it was new to me.
So at some point you literally replied, "Sorry, we don't haggle. There's no negotiations." Or what did you do when big companies try to haggle with you?
That was the same. Like all customers pay the same price, and our prices are published, and that was that really. I think no, and there was a whole set of companies I'd not come into contact before, which were software resellers, which is something as an individual I really didn't see the point. Like it was something like, why would you have some guy buying software for you when you can actually buy that software directly. It's only later that I came to realize that no, they've actually gone through all the pain with those purchasing departments, and they are now the conduit into that company where you can potentially reduce your pain, and also the purchasing department doesn't need to do all the contract negotiation with them again. They've set up a contract there with them and they can do it. So it's a way to get the software into those companies. And so I became to actually really like those, but they were also frequently asking for a discount because I guess that's what they always did. And I told them, again, same thing, same price for everybody, but feel free to add whatever margin you need on top for your customers. Whether this was strategically sound or not, I cannot tell you, but it's what I did and it worked out all right.
So you said you didn't have at the top of your mind that you wanted to actually sell this, and the bootstrap models from DHH and 37 Signals. But then in the end of the day, we know that you did in fact sell at some point. So how did this process start? I mean, you weren't looking. So was someone looking at you then? I mean, did someone approach you to for this acquisition?
I think in general, software companies aren't really being sold; they're being bought. I think that's very much the case. There's probably exceptions when you can go on some marketplace and find buyers for your SaaS and all that, but in general, they're being bought. And the market that you have for an acquisition like that isn't always very large because everything needs to be at the right time in terms of size. You cannot be too big because then it's very difficult to swallow you, and there's very few that can actually afford you. The buyer needs to be in a position where it actually makes sense for them from a business perspective to want to expand at this point in time in the direction that you have there. And that all kind of has to somehow come together. And there has to be somebody on the buyer side then also convinced that it's worth to go through the effort instead of building, which could be with the build versus buy, instead of building that solution for yourself as a company, because at that point you have, if you're able to acquire other companies, you probably have enough capital to finance quite a bit of development yourself. What is more difficult to acquire is brand name. That is more difficult to rebuild than the lines of code themselves. So that is something that is also possible, but takes time. And so buying a company can also mean taking a shortcut in that timeline and getting there sooner. But yes, in this case, as I said, I really didn't want to sell, and but then I'd been approached, and then I thought rather early on already, and no, it didn't really feel like it. But then eventually, I came across this blog article from Jason Cohn.
I need to say that he's an absolute great guy. Everything he writes, you need to read.
Yes, and if it was an article from about 10-15 years ago when he sold Smart Bear. I think some people may still be familiar with the software if you've been around in the JVM and web services space a bit longer. But anyway, he sold this company, and so that was very much in opposition to the model I'd seen or I'd been very enamored with 37 Signals, which is keeping your company forever. And he had kind of this model where with the different companies and his trajectory in his career, where it kind of Tarzaned from one and then swung into a bigger and bigger and bigger company as he went and founded them. And the article that really swayed me was, I think it was called Rich versus King. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that was the title. And basically he had this thing where he had this graph where you would have money on one axis and quality of life on the other. And it had some kind of S-shaped curve where you would start with, I have nothing in the bank and you live on the street, and then your quality of life isn't very good. But as soon as you get from that to actually getting $100 in the bank and you can start to buy food for yourself and other things, quality of life improves. And then from there to having your own place, and then gradually with these jumps, like quality of life improves until to the point where you can then maybe buy your own home, never need to look on the right-hand side of the restaurant menu again, and have your own private jet. And the thing is, it improves very steeply in the beginning, and then it kind of levels off. And that leveling off part, or that threshold that he described there, was the point where you never need to work again in life, where basically that's it. Like you never need to look for employment. You've got enough. And I thought, well, that's quite a compelling argument, because going back to those fears I was talking about before with the risk of a fork, we're talking about a space now where the hyperscalers are coming up. Ask Elastic and other companies how much fun that has been for them that had an open source offering. So I'm looking at these risks and I think, well, I'm kind of flying under the radar for now. It's okay because I've got this business and it's small enough that it's not interesting for a bigger player. But they could just have that as a loss leader where they don't need to make money to somehow attract people to their platform. And I started seeing this as a real risk where I didn't have a pension saved up. I had nothing because I'd done those consultancy years and I figured I'd have to figure it out at some point. But I thought something, there's all eggs in the same basket here. Something needs to happen. And that kind of got me thinking, maybe I should reconsider. Maybe I should entertain an offer to buy after all. And especially if the sum is right and ideally it wouldn't be just for me. My wife would also not need to work again, because what would be the fun of that if I would just be at home and she's gotta go and work the whole day? Like, then all the cool stuff you could do, you can't really do together. So that's not really the idea. So it'd have to be enough for the two of us to then be able to enjoy that. And
adjusted to local Munich pricing.
Yes. Local Munich pricing and my age as well. So I was at the end of my 30s there at the time. So I expected, okay, maybe I'll live another 50 years if I'm lucky. If I'm very lucky, maybe 55 years. Or so I need to kind of count. Like I need like 110 years of revenue or something. I don't need to live extravagantly, but and it doesn't mean I won't earn money again in life, but I want to have the option not to. I want to have optionality as far as employment is concerned for the rest of my life. And so that then became some kind of target number or range where I thought that's something, if we're there, where it's okay, that then it can be considered. But on the other hand, I'm in this phase where I'm learning so much and it's so exciting, and so rare to have that opportunity. So very, very difficult to give that up, because when am I going to get that again, if ever? So that was really two strong forces that needed to be balanced there to make it work. And yes, and in the meantime, the business just keeps on growing at in my eyes, at absolutely bonkers rate. So that was really interesting. And then I had to kind of all bring it together, and many sleepless nights of what if and if I in different curves of growth and seeing like how long could I get to that point myself. Maybe I don't need to sell. Maybe I can just get to that point of never need to work again myself and be done with it. And eventually we did get to a number that was in that range. And then I thought, well, I got to make a decision here. There's an offer on the table. I got to make a decision on what to do, whether I choose one path or the other.
Did you have a sparring partner? Did you talk through everything with your wife? Did you have anyone to talk with, or was it literally just going on in your head and you had this constant mental battle by yourself?
No, I did have some people I could talk to. Those people were people I'd met through MicroConf and those conferences. Because it's very difficult. You can talk to your friends here on the street. There's very little overlap in terms of experience at that point. Even my colleagues from the technical world, it's very different from what architecture decision you're going to make to make your business scale from a technical perspective. This was very different. So the pool of knowledge I could draw from was limited. But I knew people at that point who had sold their companies as well. both in consultancy and in product businesses. And so I could talk with them and then have a chat and see what their opinions were. Of course, every case is different. Some are taking VC money, some are on different routes, but it's still very valuable input in and just kind of knowing what the path ahead would look like. If I decide to sell, what would it look like? How does the process work? And a big part for me also was, am I going to fall into some kind of mental abyss when this product, which has been a major part of my life for a decade, all of a sudden is no longer mine, and I'm no longer involved, and all the time frees up all at once. And so that took a lot of research to read a lot of people, experiences from a lot of people, and kind of test those experiences against my situation to see whether it would apply or not. And I found that very often these are the people that had turned to be unhappy had been people that had neglected friendships, family, hobbies along the way, to the point where the business became the only thing in their life and became their identity. And as the load had mounted over the years, luckily this is a path I never went down to. I probably said no to friends a bit more often than I would have liked, but it wasn't neglect, and everybody was there, and all the relationships were still intact. And so I thought, no, I think I'm actually going to be okay mentally if I let go of that. And the problem of database migrations had been something I'd been involved with for a decade, and I really didn't feel like it was a passion that I needed to pursue for another 3 or 4 decades going forward. It was okay. I could do it longer, it was fine, but it was also not something that I had to do or that I was burning to do every morning. It's just kind of the problem had found me, and we kind of went along for the ride together. So all these things were kind of coming together, and then eventually, yes, a decision had to be made, and I called it the battle of the Jasons. Jason Cohn versus Jason Fried. Who was gonna, when I put everything in there, who was going to win on this one? And it turned out to be Jason Cohn. So I ended up sending him an email afterwards as well to thank him for the nudge that he'd given me from his prior self 15 years ago when he'd written his article. That was very nice.
But that's very cool. So at the end of the day, so you were messaging back and forth with Redgate, I guess, yeah, who bought. They came to you in the first place, and you kind of then you figured on some sort of a number. All these pieces came together, and then what? Do you have to imagine there is one last night where you just go to bed and say, "All right, tomorrow I'm going to send them. This is the final confirmation. This is essentially the sale, everything way you sent, and then the next day comes, and then, maybe the next day is a process because of all the legal stuff and whatever, but what does that feel like then?
Well, the sale is not something instantaneous. There's a long process there because the first thing you need to do is to lower your trousers. People have a deep look at your company and the insides of it to make sure that what you say on the bag is actually what's in the bag. And so that's that takes a while to kind of get those things sorted and feeling sure. And there's a lot of insecurity attached to that as well, because you have to share things like customer lists and all that with a company that is potentially also a competitor. And so that is really... it's a stressful time. Like, am I getting screwed over here, or are they going to be as fair as they say they are? Because you're in the weaker position. They're by definition larger than you are if they're acquiring you. So that was not an easy thing. And of course, because easy mode would be boring, I went snowboarding in the middle of that and fractured the vertebra right in the middle of this, and was stuck with couldn't even sit for 10 minutes at a time without being in pain right in the middle of this entire due diligence process and the sale and all that. So that was a fun couple of months, really. but type 2 fun, not type 1. It was It was quite intense.
So that whole process took a couple of months, the letting trousers down?
Yes, which is rather quick for something like that. You have to think there. So there is basically, so you share your customer list. There is a. They also look at, have you been operating your business like you should have, or do you have have you not been paying your taxes or other things? Have you been cheating? And so they're asking all these questions in this standard list of questions that you have. And so, how many offices do you have? 0. Do you sometimes refuel your private car with company money? I don't have any car. I have a 10-year-old bicycle. and so that kind of went, they were like a small silence on the other end of the line and said, okay, I think we're done here with our questions. So that went rather nicely. And they were very friendly as well. But yeah, so that was, because the operation was so simple, relatively speaking, it went relatively smooth as well.
And what is the last thing in the process? Is there one last signature and then you just close the door?
So the way it works is that you go to the notary here in Germany to sell a company, and then all parties are there. And Germany being Germany, the contract is quite long, and the notary has to read every single word of it, which is just a joke. So you sit there for hours while the notary reads at 300 words per minute, where you can hardly understand what they say, but they have the legal obligation to do so. And eventually, maybe there is some small things that you still annotate if there is still, even though you've reviewed the documents a million times. And oh yeah, by the way, didn't do this all by myself. I had to get some good M&A lawyers. Again, lucky through some friends that had sold their company before, got to use one of the lawyers that he had used, and then that worked out very well. And they were good partners for that as well. And so, but even though you've reviewed all the documents and you've kind of reconciliated all the differences and all that has kind of worked, and you still find the odd typo or something at the so those tiny details still being fixed. Yeah, and then the sale is structured in such a way that in Germany call it Zug um Zug, that when you have multiple parts of something like that happening, that the whole thing only becomes effective the minute all the parts have been fulfilled. Because in this case, like there's signing to transfer the assets, but the money needs to transfer the other way, and there is other things, and so all that needs to kind of be fulfilled, and then the sale completes or closes. And then basically had a glass of champagne and with the lawyers, and then my parents were visiting at the time, and we didn't know when the sale was going to close because there were still details to work out. And eventually, we were okay. It's going to happen Tuesday. And we had arranged to go with my wife and my parents to Vienna. So they were there, and I had to go. In this case, it was in Hamburg to sign. And so I went there for the day, and then flew to Vienna. And my wife wanted to go to some kind of fancy restaurant, but I thought that's not really my style. So we ended up going to Wurstelbude and had a bottle of champagne at the Wurstelbude there, and had the highest bill the Wurstelbude I'd ever seen. But it was a lot of fun, and that's exactly how I liked it. So that was.
Oh, that is quite a cool
story.
So
the Wurstelbude is a sausage stand in Vienna.
Yes, yeah. And then let's say, so I guess it must have been an insane amount of feelings going through you on that day, essentially, or throughout that whole period, essentially. What happens one day later? You go to sleep, you wake up. Do you think you're in fairyland? Do you think any of this has just happened, that you were actually at the Wurstelbude with the champagne? I mean, can you believe it at that point?
It's very surreal. And at some point, the bank transaction comes through, and it's just any other transfer, just a very large one, but it's just like the same notification on your phone that it comes in. And and then there was no time to relax, because at the end, that's when the real work starts, with transferring all the accounts, and all the technical work for the transition period begins. So there was no time to really relax. It was pretty much full on from there on, from the next couple of months, to kind of get everything up and running, to pass the baton, because it's a business like that is, even though rather small, still a lot of complexity and all. Not everything is articulated online in terms of vision or trade-offs that are being made, or why decisions were made the way they were, and how this test infrastructure, for example, that I had in private, how that is running, transferring all those things, just all the technicalities then had to be taken care of, and and that took then a while to kind of get the team on the other side up to speed and all that. So
how much time did that take, by the way, just roughly?
So we had a contractual agreement that this could take up to 2 years, but I insisted on front loading the effort as much as possible in mutual interest. I thought it would be better for the buyer to become independent as soon as possible, with the added benefit that I would then be relieved of having to do any more of that work as soon as possible. So I thought it was really a win-win to front load as much of that effort as possible, and that turned out, I think, to be a good decision for both parties.
And looking back, because you already mentioned that you never completely cut off, let's say, friends and acquaintances and hobbies and whatever, I guess then you never fell into that deep hole that some people fall into after, a long while with such successful exits.
No, but I was mentally spent from that phase, from the sales, of those months of the sale and the due diligence and the broken back and everything that kind of came together, where I didn't feel the need to sit at a computer too much. I thought, now it's time to start dealing with other things. Vertebra recovered during that phase. I put on a few kilos as well. I thought, we're going to get rid of those. I've been sitting way too much for the last 20 years. Start to work a little bit on trying to salvage what is left of this IT body and crust it in a chair and see if there's things that can be done there as well. So invested a bit more time in that, which was very good as a first phase, and then we had planned to. So this is the end of 2019, and then we planned on going traveling for a while, because this is something I've always enjoyed very much. I've gone on multiple multi-month trips around the world. It's something I really enjoy, and it's how I met my wife as well. She likes those things as well, and so we're planning on doing that. And so she then gave her notice and quit her job in March of 2020. And we know how well the traveling plans went after that.
Right?
Yeah.
So you two just sat back at home and...
yeah, but it was good. It was good. So we had that. And no, but we did have some traveling that year. I treated myself to, since I had this 10-year-old bicycle, as I mentioned, I treated myself to a new bicycle, and... We cycled from Munich to Crete that autumn, and so that was a lot of fun to do, and so they did a few things there, so that was good.
Looking back at all of this, is there something for any grand? Now is your the moment for grand advice. If you had someone, a coder, technical person, anything that you think is the key highlight worth mentioning if they think about starting a tech business, selling it at some point, and it could be an open source business, could be a SaaS, whatever it is. Anything from your experience where you think, hey, this is, I don't know, the most important bits and pieces I would have liked to have had myself?
I think that the valuable lessons, which I already mentioned, was kind of work back from the customer to the product instead of start from the product and then go and towards the customer. I think that was such a huge insight in just how to approach the overall ergonomics of how you use, whether it's free, open source, commercial. I think for any kind of product or even physical item or what, I think it's just so valuable to start from the customer and work back from there. And then I think in terms of the business, it's hard to say, because this now worked very well at a specific point in time in a specific industry, and the world keeps on changing. So I think it's hard to kind of give this advice for the future. I think if I were to distill it into what worked well, was this focus on simplicity, on ensuring that what is there is actually working in terms of the library, not having those dependencies. That worked very well. Keeping a tight grip on the intellectual property and not giving that away without thinking or muddying it without thinking. Make it a conscious decision. Whether you want to accept any kind of contribution, that's fine, but then be aware that it will restrict certain kind of business models in the future. I think the value of a brand is something that is often underestimated from a technical perspective, just how much value this has, that it is a household name that everybody knows. It is more important than having the perfect implementation behind the scenes. It is really something that is very difficult to replicate. And so having that kind of marketing aspect or building that awareness is really something that's also very, very critical for that. Yeah, I think those are if we're looking back, those are like the big lessons learned for me along the way, I think.
I always like to end the interviews with some humorous rapid fire questions. Before we come to these questions, I need to mention we're raffling licenses for IntelliJ IDEA. You have to leave a comment down below the video. And today's question might very well be, you need to tell us, Axel told us he likes to travel. What is Axel's most favorite country in the world that he's ever been to, including the city? Leave a comment down below, and the people who are closest or who match the country will win some licenses. We'll get back to you on this. Now, to finish off with some humorous rapid-fire questions. I mentioned it to you before already. I know you're from Belgium. I always like to end up with the nationality from the person somehow connected to the product, which is Flyway in this case. So the first question I have for you, waffles or chocolate? What powered more Flyway commits?
Hard to say. Almost tempted to say neither, because I haven't had access to those every day here. But probably the odd waffle on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Yeah, but it's got to be the kind from Liège and not from Brussels with the extra sugar in the dough.
What is the difference between these two? Sorry.
So one kind from Liège has got a lot of thick bits of sugar in the dough, gets very sticky and it caramelizes when you put it in the waffle iron. And types from Brussels are more fluffier, and you will have then toppings on them, which could be like strawberries or the powdered sugar or other things on them. But the ones from Liège are the best.
All right. If Flyway were a Belgian beer, which one would it be, and which beer would Liquibase have been?
Hard to say. So it's got to be something simple. It cannot be too complex. Well, obviously, I didn't like the taste of Liquibase, so that's got to be a left, because I don't really like the taste of left, and it's still widespread. Right, so I think that's something that would match.
Right.
And for Flyway, I think as it grew over the years and had a nice texture, I would go for a triple Carmelite.
Okay, a triple Carmelite. All right. What is the most Belgian word you'd use to describe Flyway?
It's fast when you execute it. I would say volle petrol.
Volle petrol.
Yeah.
Volle petrol. Axel, thank you very much for doing this podcast. I found it superb exciting. And I think for everyone who likes to look at the business side of things with tech stuff, I think it's going to help out tons of people. Thank you very much for doing it. I enjoyed it a lot.
Well, thank you for having me, Marco. So if people are looking for me, I'm not very active on social media, but you can find me on X or on Blue Sky or on LinkedIn as Axel Fontaine. And if you're interested these days in what I'm doing, I have a product out there called Sprinters, and that is a way to cut your GitHub Actions bill by 10x by running your actions on your own AWS account. So if you're interested in that, you're welcome. And otherwise, feel free to connect on social media. It would be a pleasure to hear from you.
Check out the project, check out Sprinter, and make sure, as we said with the open source stuff, leave Axel a note even if it's just for this podcast, if it's for Sprint or for anything he did, I think he'll very much enjoy that. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.